So I know this looks political, I know, but I promise it's only tangentially so, simply because it's in the news right now, and I think it's a really great lesson in how not to treat your staff, courtesy of the Young Turks. Now, if you haven't seen this story yet, essentially the Young Turks is a very, very liberal YouTube network, very progressive. I shouldn't even say liberal because they're not. They're like way, way, way progressive. And what happened is their staff has recently tried to unionize, and irony of ironies, Cenk Uygur, who is, I guess, in charge of the Young Turks, he has urged his staff not to unionize, which is ironic because they're a progressive network that would generally support unions in any other circumstances except for ones that apply to their own staff. Rules for thee, but not for me. But listen, there are a lot of people that have talked about the politics of all this and the irony of all this, and I'm going to leave that up to them. What I am interested in is how this is going to impact their staff, because I've talked about this before. This is going to be the year of employee turnover. 2020 is 100% going to be the year of turnover. And we know this because there's research out there to tell us that up to 64% of employees may choose to leave their jobs in 2020. 2019 was like the year of employee disengagement. Is they were kind of sitting in their jobs and they're like, meh, like I don't hate it enough to leave, but I'm not really engaged with what I'm doing. 2020 is the year that they're leaving. And so I want to look at this article in context of that and ask ourselves, how much more could they be losing simply by treating their staff in a way that might not be the most productive if they want an engaged, healthy workforce? So let's take a look at this article from the Huffington Post. The Young Turks progressive founder urged his staff not to unionize. In a tense meeting with employees, Cenk Uygur argued that a union doesn't belong at a small news network struggling to make profits. Now, listen, I obviously don't know much about their business model, but it's my understanding that they're not really struggling to make profits. I mean, yeah, I would actually be very, very surprised if that was true, but who knows? I mean, maybe they just run a really crappy business and maybe that has truth to it. I don't know, but I would be surprised if they're really struggling as much as they think they are. Listen, I work with a lot of small businesses, a fair amount of them actually, and there's a difference between struggle in like you're bootstrapping a startup sort of thing and struggle in a well-established, well-known brand entity. Those are two different kinds of struggle. But let's take a look. Top leadership at the progressive news network, the Young Turks, held an all-staff meeting in its office in Culver City, California on February 12th. The regularly scheduled gathering was supposed to deal with personnel matters, but instead the focus turned to the staff's nascent union campaign, which has just gone public. Good for the staff, man. Listen, if you want to hold your employer's feet to the fire, you make something public. You go to the press, and in this case, they very literally are the press, so they know how to do that. Earlier that day, a Twitter handle claiming to represent the TYT employees had announced on the social media platform their intention to form a union. In the staff meeting, the network's co-founder and influential host, Cenk Uygur, urged employees not to do so, arguing that a union does not belong in a small independent outlet like TYT, according to two workers who were present. He said that if there had been a union at the network, it would not have grown the way it has. Well, that seems to be a pretty negative assumption. And I think that fundamentally, that assumption that if your employees unionize, that it's not going to help the growth of the company. I mean, functionally, and listen, I'm not up to date on all like the specifics of unions, so please correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. But functionally, unions allow employees to do collective bargaining with the company, which is fundamentally about taking care of what their needs are, making sure they have their basic, if not more than basic, needs fulfilled by the company. I think that could be a good thing. Now, I also think there are sometimes nefarious things that go along with unions that I'm not really going to get into here. I don't necessarily agree with them. But to make the assumption that a union is fundamentally opposed to the growth of a business, I think is a little bit of a reach. And it tells me that he might have a little bit of an adversarial relationship with his employees. I would actually be very interested to go in and measure his employee team resiliency, because I think, if you view your employees as kind of like the enemy, that can't bode well for your fundamental success. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what that tells me. His talk, emotional at times, the staffer said, with Younger throwing his papers to the ground at one point and chastising an employee. Listen, you want to turn your employees off real quick, you chastise one of them at an all-staff meeting. Oh my God. Seemed to contradict the progressive workers first ethos that TYT broadcasts to millions of lefty followers. Jack Gerard, who is acting as the company's chief operating officer as Younger runs for Congress in California, told the staff they were not discouraging unionization. Well, there seem to be some mixed messages there, Jack. You and Jank need to get on the same page. But the message from Younger was clear and, to at least some staffers, discouraging. We feel genuinely disappointed, but unshaken, said one staffer who spoke on the condition of anonymity for fear of retaliation. Okay, if you are unshaken, you are probably not going to only speak on the condition of anonymity under fear of retaliation. Those two things are diametrically opposed, folks. We feel it's the right thing to do because of what TYT values. Isn't that... Yeah, I just want to highlight this line. We feel that unionization is the right thing to do because of what TYT values. How many of their fundamental liberal values are the employees of the Young Turks going to start calling into question if their leadership does not appear to be living those values, and in fact not just living them, but downright discouraging those values? Doesn't that call everything else you know about them and what they care about and what they believe in into question? It just makes no sense. In an interview with Huffington Post, Younger said he was a strong supporter of unions, especially at large corporations that aren't sharing profits with their workers. But he said he worries a sustained unionized workforce would bring new legal and bureaucratic costs that TYT can't sustain. Okay, so listen, in my book, Zen Your Work, I talk a lot about being in the present moment. Not spending too much time worrying about what's happened in the past, because you can't go back and change everything, or anything at all, really. And also not worrying or spending any energy on fearing what could happen in the future, because you don't know. It seems to me that Cenk has taken just a fundamentally negative approach here, where he's assumed that union means bad. And frankly, like, if his fundamental assumption is union means bad, then why in God's name is he a progressive anyway? Like, I just don't understand. That's a pretty staple thing of that type of ideology, so that just makes no sense. It also makes me question what other values does he claim to have and claim to be principled in that he just doesn't agree with and doesn't want to practice in his normal everyday life. It would make me question everything about him as a boss and as a leader, to be frank. But this focus on union bad, union is going to destroy us, union is going to make it impossible to operate, that's just living in fear of what might happen in the future. It's not focusing on the present and what the problem you have in front of you right now. He's fundamentally setting himself up for massive failure in this approach. It just makes no sense. In an interview with Huffington Post, Younger said he's in strong support of unions, especially at large corporations that are, okay, we read that, but he said he's worried the network has a growing subscription base and has raised venture capital money, but faces some of the same headwinds as other online media with the collapse of ad revenue. So that means that tells me that something funny is going on in the operations of the business. Because they're doing pretty well. I mean, my perception of the Young Turks, and again, this is not a world that I live in, but my perception of them is that they're doing okay. So that doesn't really make much sense to me. The reality is we're in a precarious position. I wonder how much money Cenk Uygur makes. I bet you his employees know how much money he makes. And listen, okay, let me just cut to the chase. He's not doing too badly. Cenk Uygur is not in the poorhouse by any stretch of the imagination. It just makes no sense. Does he think that his employees don't know roundabout some sort of metric of how much he gets paid, and he's telling them we're in a precarious position? I'll bet you his employees don't make that much either. I mean, compared to market rate, I would bet you if this is what's going on, it's that he is very highly paid and his employees may be market rate, but I'm just gonna stand a wager, and someone tell me if you know, leave a comment, tell me if you know, like, What type of salary do Young Turks employees make? Because if this is the attitude going in, I suspect he's probably underpaying them. For a small digital company, these are absolutely real considerations. Yeah, sure, but it doesn't mean, well, listen, the next sentence, it doesn't mean you shouldn't have a union. Everyone should know the full context. If folks say they don't believe we're in a precarious position, okay, and that's their decision to make. And it's also their decision to make, Shank, if they're going to choose to leave the company and leave you in the lurch. It's also their decision to make if they choose to become completely disengaged with the work they're doing and not come in and give 110% because they've just seen you turn your back on values you expressed to have for the sake with these excuses. And I'm sorry, these just seem like excuses to me. There is no evidence that a union is going to be the destruction of this business. It just makes no sense. Younger said he was caught off guard by the union's effort that appeared on Twitter the day of the meeting. That's one of the prices you pay for being in a leadership position. You got to be able to think on your feet, man. And that it was so early in the process, he wasn't sure if it was real or if he was being punked. He acknowledged that he threw papers in the meeting in a downward direction, not towards anyone, he noted. And then, I mean, that's better than Amy Klobuchar chucking binders at people, so we have to give Shank points for that. At least he didn't throw a binder and hit someone in the head. And then he reprimanded an employee who he believed was smiling. Do not smile ever. No smiles allowed. I mean, come on. According to staffer, Younger said it was meant to be funny later. An ominous statement they found unsettling. He told HuffPost it wasn't meant to be a threat. I'm sure the person you accosted in an all-staff meeting definitely didn't take it as a threat at all, Shank. The person smiling seemed to be openly mocking the idea that the company might not survive after 18 years, and we put in all this blood, sweat, and tears into it. I don't find the idea of us going down funny. I don't think the idea of any company going down is funny, but if a company has survived for 18 years and is, looks to be thriving from the outside, and simple math can tell us that they're probably doing okay, then why is he so worried about the company failing? I mean, I don't buy into it. This just seems really disingenuous. And I'm going to bet you his employees think it's pretty disingenuous too. And listen, this is, you know what this is? I just thought of this. You know what this is? This is total creation of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Maybe Shank has some deep-seated, subconscious thing where he wants to go down in flames, and now he's making that happen. I see this all the time with people where they have a bad experience at one job, they convince themselves they're going to get fired, even if their CEO has no ambition to fire them. They're not even thinking about it, but the employee convinces themselves, I'm going to get fired, all this bad stuff is going to happen. Well, guess what? Over the course of months, they act like they're going to get fired, and in the process, they create the self-fulfilling prophecy and end up getting fired. They literally created it just by believing it was true. Why does Shank believe the business is going to fail? Why is that? Why has he convinced himself that the business is going to fail? Of all the things that I find alarming about this article, that's probably the one that his employees should be most concerned about. Why is Shank trying to create a self-fulfilling prophecy of his business failing? Because if this wasn't happening, and again, I'm saying this is on a deep subconscious level, I don't necessarily think this is something he is conscious of, but it's absolutely there, and it makes no sense. Media has become a fertile ground for union organizing in recent years, with workers at both old legacy newspapers and newer web-only outlets seeking the protections of a collective bargaining agreement. Makes sense. The union push has made for some awkwardness at organizations with liberal reputations where management may resist collective bargaining despite overseeing labor-friendly coverage. And this is what we call people who don't have principled positions. They have positions that are convenient for them to get the clicks they want to get and write the stories they want to write, but when the rubber meets the road, they do not back them up. You should always be wary, especially if you're looking for a job right now. It's 64% of you probably are. Always be wary when the leadership of your company says one thing publicly and then does another behind the curtain. It's just not a situation you want to end up in. The campaign at TYT comes with another wrinkle. Younger's attack, and I keep saying his name different ways. I'm not exactly sure how to say his last name. I'm sorry. Younger's attempt to fill congressional seat vacated, so he's basically running for Congress, blah, blah, blah. As the union spat became public, Younger suggested on Twitter that the union campaign was politically motivated by the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, the union trying to organize TYT's employees. Yes, it is all a vast conspiracy. They endorsed Smith in the race, so they endorsed his opponent, but staffers said that their first organizing discussions date back more than 2 years, and a recent attempt to round up support began shortly before Younger declared his candidacy, a timeline confirmed by a union organizer. Okay, listen. If this is true, if these discussions date back more than 2 years, Cenk is absolutely full of it if he didn't know what was going on. There's one of two things that are happening. Either he is completely and totally full of it, or he is a really absentee leader of this business and is not paying attention. And either way, it's not good. IATSE has asked the Young Turks management to voluntarily recognize the union through card checks, saying a clear majority of staffers who would be represented have signed union cards. That has often been the course at liberal media organizations, so staff can avoid the pressures of a union election. IATSE would represent the production and post-production staff, about a quarter of the company's 65-employee workforce. But TYT management has proposed having workers vote in a secret ballot election to be administered by a third party outside the National Labor Relations Board. Management has also disputed the union's proposed bargaining agreement, saying some of the employees should be considered managers. I mean, that's probably legit. Younger told HuffPost he wants a secret ballot election because a few employees told him after the meeting they do not support a union. Some, not all. What that means is like one person probably told him. Here's what happened. One person is trying to ingratiate themselves to him. They're like, I don't really support all this nonsense. And now Shake Jao, some employees told me. So full of shit. I'm sorry, I shouldn't swear, but I don't buy it. Am I supposed to say I don't care what you want? He said. That's crazy. In recent cases where liberal outlets have resisted a union drive, such as at Slate, employees have typically ended up unionizing anyway, either through an election or a public pressure campaign that wears down the employer. Why do you have to wear down your employer when these should be values that they're expressing to hold? Why does there have to be wearing down? It makes no sense. Please, people, can we just start taking principled positions on things? If you believe something is true and something is right, then don't act in opposition to that belief. I mean, I just don't understand it at all. And if you don't believe something is true and right, well, then, take that stance as well. But why are we operating in these, fantasy lands where you say one thing in public and do another in private? Now, of course, I know the answer to that, because human beings are horribly flawed and they lie all the time. And again, I really like to try to see the best in everyone. I really do. I think that it is a choice to see the best in people. But then you have stuff like this come out and it's like, oh my God, people keep disappointing me over and over and over again. And listen, if I'm disappointed as someone reading this, and by the way, I don't even like the Young Turks. I have never liked the Young Turks. Even back in Air America days, I remember, because I used to listen back when I was a really staunch Democrat. I used to listen to Air America all the time. I remember it was the only liberal radio station, and Young Turks was on it then, and I hated it then. So I have not been paying attention to them at all. But this just doesn't, I just don't get it. I don't know why people would want to go to work for something like this. And if I'm disappointed as a person just reading an article and knowing the kind of ideology that they put out there, can you imagine how disappointed their employees are? And I'm going to bet you that most of their employees buy into this. They buy into the message the Young Turks have been spreading for years and years and years. Pro-union, union good, workers of the world unite, and all that stuff. What message is this sending to them? This is going to make them see this entire operation differently. It's going to make them see the man that is leading the company differently. It's just a horrible decision all the way around. And the thing of it is, if Cenk was really opposed to the union, I know we haven't read the article, but we've read the majority of it, so I'm just going to spout off for a second. If Cenk was really opposed to the union, then go about addressing the situation in a much more strategic way that is still going to take into consideration the morale of your employees. Because if your employees become disengaged, you know what the cost? Jake wants to worry about costs. You know what the cost of a disengaged employee is? It's like 30% of their annual salary. You will waste 30% of their annual salary if these employees become disengaged because you've just shown them that you do not have values or principle stances. I mean, come on. Look, at the end of the day, my opinion on it is irrelevant, he said. It's the employees who get to decide and who should decide. Well, he really hasn't acted in a way that tells me that he thinks that his opinion on it is irrelevant. The TYT staffer who spoke on the condition of anonymity describes support for the union as a solid majority and says it hasn't frayed despite the turmoil of the past week and a half. If anything, I would have hoped they would have dug their heels in even stronger. The staffer also said colleagues are insistent on the company recognizing the union without a secret ballot election and including all the staff they believe should be part of it. They expected plenty of disagreements in the collective bargaining in bargaining a contract, but not over a fight regarding the formation of the union. We love the company, the staffer said. We're just getting the company to live by its principles. I'm going to say that again. This staffer views their role in the process as getting the company to live by their principles. That is the job of the leadership of the company. It is not your staff's job to get the company to live by their principles. That is your job as a leader. Oh my God. Like, I can't even. I guess ultimately I really feel for the staff of TYT right now. They're trying, like, listen, the staff of TYT is living their values. They've been living the values for the past 2 years and trying to form this union. And now in swoops the leader of this really progressive company saying, nope, can't do it. Oh God, the cognitive dissonance that they must be experiencing right now, Chank. You messed this one up, buddy. You messed this up big time. Listen, you give me a call. I'll help you fix this problem with your staff. But you gotta start making different choices, man. This is not the right way to go.